Okay, I think a good topic for a video rather than in-class discussion would be get some of the historical and very basic stuff about the Constitution. First of all, why have a Constitution, right? I think there is probably a lot of misunderstanding among lay people about what the Constitution is. A lot of people confuse the Constitution with the Declaration of Independence, right? Those are two completely different documents, right? One establishes a nation that is separate, right, from Great Britain, right? That's the Declaration of Independence, right? Our governing charter is the U.S. Constitution. Before the Constitution was adopted, the Constitutional Convention was in 1787. So you look at these dates. 1776 is a famous date, right? That's the Declaration of Independence. We didn't have a Constitutional Convention to write a Constitution until 1787, and the Constitution was adopted in 1789. So what was going on? Right, I mean, that's a good question, between 1776 and 1787. Well, what was going on was kind of a mess. The United States was operating under something called Articles of Confederation, rather than a Constitution, which you could sort of conceive as, you know, what today you look at the European Union, or what's left of it, kind of a loose affiliation, right, of different countries, right, different cultures, and what was going on prior to the adoption of the U.S. Constitution was that basically all power resided in the states, and in most states, power resided really pretty much in the legislature. You even had states where legislatures could overrule courts, which is unthinkable, right, in today's constitutional structure. States were doing strange things, like entering into treaties with foreign countries, right, on their own. States were coining their own money. The states had their own armies and navies, right, things like that. That were going on, right? So again, you look at a very loose affiliation, right? There was a Congress, but it didn't have much power. Nobody was really in charge, right? And basically, what happened was, to oversimplify a little bit, but the founders looked around and said, "This is no way to run a country, right? It's really not a country. I mean, it is in name, but it's not functioning like one." So, thus, the Constitutional Convention is convened. So the purpose of the Constitutional Convention was to move at least some power, right, out of the states and into a central government, right? The kind of power that would require a central government to coordinate, right, the states and provide for the national well-being and not just the well-being of a state. So the founders got together in Philadelphia, right, and drafted a constitution that created a three-branch federal government, right? The branches make sense. And those branches are, right, the legislative branch in Article 1, the executive branch in Article 2, and the judicial branch in Article 3. Now, what is the Constitution? First of all, you read the Constitution, and you should have reviewed that. You don't have to memorize the Constitution, but you really do have to develop a familiarity with what's in there, right? We'll talk more about that throughout the term, but that's going to be important. Not to memorize it, but to recognize something when you see it as a constitutional issue. And when you read the Constitution and look through it, some of it's specific, like you have to be at least 35 years old to be president, right? That's pretty specific. That's what lawyers or at least legal scholars call a formally realizable, right, rule, one that is easy to understand and to apply. But much of the Constitution is not like that. Much of the Constitution is written in very general terms. So why? Okay, there's a couple things, discrete ideas I want, right, just to separate out. Historically, why do we have a Constitution? Well, because we were a loose confederation of states and things were not going very well, right? And there was no centralized authority. What is the Constitution? Well, the Constitution is a short document containing mostly vague and general terms, right? There's a reason why the Constitution is written in vague and general terms. I mean, terms like interstate commerce. What is interstate commerce? Well, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about what is interstate commerce. Congress has the authority to regulate interstate commerce. That's not very particular. That's pretty general. We've got to figure out what that means, right? Coining money is pretty specific. So you see there's some specific and some not. When we get to common law 2, this really gets interesting, right? Terms like liberty and due process and equal protection and privileges and immunities, right? These are not specific terms, and they cry out, right, for some kind of analysis, some kind of interpretation, right, before they can be applied. So this is a good time to stop and mention this, right? You hear political argumentation, and that's one thing. Then you get into the law and actual studying the Constitution. And any reasonable reader of the Constitution knows that you can't say something like just apply the Constitution as it's written, because it's not written in specific terms. Right? Justice Scalia once said, right, it's not a code, right? The tax code would fill this entire room. The Constitution is shorter than some term papers that you've written in high school or college. So that being the case, okay, what does it do? It sets out a general structure, right, for government. It sets out generally what is the power of government, and also specifies some limits on the power of government. So that's one of the ways you want to organize this course, right? Each government that we look at, what's the scope of power, and what are some of the limits on that power? We just talked about three. There's the federal legislative branch, right? What is it allowed to do? What is it not allowed to do? There's the federal executive branch, the president. What is that branch allowed to do, not allowed to do? Federal courts, that's where we're starting. What are federal courts allowed to do? What is the scope of their power? What are some of the limits on the scope of their power, right? Those are the questions. And then we also study in Con Law 1 states, right? State power is dealt with mostly in the 10th Amendment. Now, by the way, I'm throwing a lot at you here. That's why this is an introductory video, right? Just trying to kind of set the stage, right? Why do we have a constitution? Because things were kind of a mess, okay? So we go to Philadelphia, we write a constitution, we come out with a federal government, a national government, right? And that government has three branches, and now we have right, a situation where we have to decide what branch does what, and then we have to decide what level of government does what. Is it going to be federal government responsible for something, or states? Okay, more on that again throughout the term. So that's why we have a constitution. That's what the Constitution is. The Constitution, as we'll see, right, as when we talk about Marbury, is the law. It is law. But it is law directed to the government. That's a critical point, right? It is not a law that governs private conduct, right? It's law directed to the government, telling the government, each kind of government, right? Here's what you're allowed to do, here's what you're not allowed to do, and here's the way things are, right? Here's the structure. Okay, I said in the intro video, right, that in Con Law 1, the question is, can the government do that? I'm going to constantly hammer this point home. The answer to that question depends what government you're talking about. The federal legislature has its rules, the federal executive has its rules, federal courts have their rules, and states have their rules. I hope that makes sense. So again, think of four things, four big things going on in Con Law 1, right? Each of the three branches and states. Okay, that's enough of that. Of course, you know, there's going to be a lot of these videos going up, and I'm sorry I can't get them all up before we meet. You know, for the week 1 stuff, but I'll have to post some videos after we meet. I hope this allows you to sort of do Con Law in manageable chunks, you know, as you're managing your life through what I know are difficult times for everybody. All right, that's enough for this one. Stay well and stay tuned, and look forward to meeting you.